as he said, my training really is an architect and a jazz musician. I've always tried to think of ways to combine those two disciplines. Sometimes I try to make architecture more like music, and as a result, I've developed this series of works I call urban musical instruments. And at other times, I try to make music more like architecture, make it more physical, more visual, and I'll show a couple of examples from that. So the urban musical instruments, here's a short little piece that I think gives a good introduction.
Margaret Teisner is about to take us to meet is not a musician. Then again, perhaps he is. Come to think of it, no, he isn't.
This is the kind of person I get on a committee when we have to decide who's going to win a project here.
Down the path from his home in Lexington, Massachusetts, in a converted greenhouse, he creates urban musical instruments for the public to play.
What's that?
Well, this is actually a simulation of the piece that's in the New York City subway. And in fact, what happens in the subway, if no one plays the instrument for 5 minutes, it plays itself for 5 seconds.
Not only does the installation at 34th Street and 6th Avenue play itself, what it plays depends on the people playing it.
I want it to be a part of your everyday life. On your way to work, you have some kind of aesthetic experience. People don't tend to look right at each other. People are just minding their own business, and they're waiting for the train. So right there, you've got a stage, you've got a possibility. And what I find most intriguing is when complete strangers are all of a sudden playing this thing together. They're looking at each other, they're smiling, they're laughing. My interest is that it transforms an urban space and puts a little relaxation into an otherwise tense environment.
For Janney, understanding the physical nature of sound goes back to playing the drums. For him, striking beams of light to make sound is the same thing. He took time off from college to tour with jazz groups. Everything about his art is about the spontaneity of jazz.
Some of the great elements of playing jazz is that you don't know what's around the corner. And you don't know what's going to happen when you all get together and play.
Chris Janney says he is trying to change the environment to make people look differently at their surroundings. But the only description of his work that comes close to experiencing it is what he has to say about his Miami Airport project. He wanted it to be like walking into a rainbow.
If you try to imagine that, it must be a pretty interesting thing. You know, you get to walk through these bands of color, and that's in fact what the harmonic runway is.
It stretches the length of a moving sidewalk in the new international concourse of the Miami airport. And note, not one passenger is pushing by anyone, racing to get to the end. It is supposed to be soothing. It is supposed to be a fantasy abstraction of the colors and sounds of South Florida.
I think that you can hear color. I think that you can see sound. These are not things that the engineer or, that we should all agree are reality. But I think in the artist world, this is all quite possible.
But the art of the possible in the case of Harmonic Runway had to be made reality by the art of the practical. What Chris Janney creates is public art, but for him that does not mean a statue in a park. It means people interacting with technology to transform a place into a moment, a form into a feeling.
Well, in that sense, really, I'm a musician. I mean, what does a musician want? What does a jazz musician want? It's never played the same way twice. They're experiments for me. That's a lot of what my life and my work is really about. I don't know what's going to happen when I put it out there. That's why I put it out there.
As if it is alive. Like some sleeping soul, it will wait for someone to come along and waken it.
Okay, so it's about sound and light, it's about interactivity, it's about invisible things in the public environment, trying to change the perception of the public environment, trying to make, for me, trying to make certain things that are invisible, visible. And certainly this piece, which was my thesis at MIT in the early 70s or the mid-70s, which is now in the Science Museum here, sound stereo, here it is on the Spanish Steps in Rome. The idea of trying to make those kinds of rhythms that people naturally create as they move up and down stairs, either as a solo or when groups of people are there, trying to use that as a basis for creating some kind of real-time musical composition. This piece, a sister to that, and also clearly an urban musical instrument, was on where I was commissioned to do the facade of an entire parking structure in Charlotte, North Carolina. And so I wanted to turn it into basically a giant music box where you literally stepped up and touched a building and it would play. Here's a little clip.
Ancient buildings use statues to tell a story. This one at Brevard and 7th uses rhyme. The fish smells fine. To crack the code, you have to solve the riddle. Press the red panels in the right order and watch what happens.
If you do solve it, all the lights go off simultaneously and the different sounds chime. So you should know when you solve the riddle.
So what is this landmark? It's a parking deck, known as the 7th Street Station. Bank of America and the Arts and Science Council collaborated on the Uptown Musical Garage. It's already making a difference.
We decided to come this way so that we could check out the wall. We were hoping that it wasn't crowded and we could figure out the pattern and play with it.
Okay, so turning buildings into musical instruments and turning buildings into riddles. This piece is the National Steamboat Monument in Cincinnati, Ohio. And actually, what you see here is an old paddle wheel from one of the steam boats over above a series of columns that trigger light, sound, and steam. Every year, the city also has a festival called the Tall Stacks Festival. So I wrote a piece of music. Here's what my scores look like. So that members of the Cincinnati Pops brass section could actually walk around playing music while a friend of mine, Stan Strickland, who's a rather well-known saxophonist in Boston, plays an electronic flute that actually plays the fountain together with the Cincinnati Pops. Here's a little clip.
You're watching WLWT-TV, Channel 5, Cincinnati. From the home of Sky 5, this is Eyewitness News 5 at noon.
A new monument of Cincinnati's riverfront is paying tribute to the area's rich heritage of steamboats. This morning, the National Steamboat Monument was officially dedicated. Look at that. The Steamboat Monument has a host of interactive activities. Greg McKinney joins us live with more on this unique addition to the riverfront. Greg, a monument that's hard to miss.
It really is. It's absolutely beautiful, and it's right next to the Great American Ballpark. It really is something to see, and if you're wondering where we're standing, we're right here in the middle of this massive monument, really, and it's called the Whistle Grove, where we're standing here at the moment. And if you wonder why they call it the Whistle Grove, take a look and listen. Isn't that something? That was the scene earlier this morning at the official dedication of the National Steamboat Monument. A brass band performed alongside the steam columns and worked interactively with them. There are sensors that make these columns blow off steam when you walk by them, so this was choreographed beautifully. And there's a plaque right underneath the paddle wheel that contains a riddle based on steamboat history. Figure out that riddle and you'll be provided with directions for walking around inside the Whistle Grove to set off a special calliope and a steam performance.
Yeah. He mentioned it's right next to the Great American Ballpark. So when I was designing the piece, the Arts Commission said, well, could you do something that could relate to the ballpark? And I said, okay, how about when the Cincinnati Reds team, somebody on that team, hits a home run, the manager in the dugout can pick up the phone and dial a code, and the fountain will play. And they said, could you really do that? I said, well, I don't know. Can the Cincinnati Reds really hit a home run? We need this. There we go. Okay, so the other side of my work and my life is about making music more like architecture, making it more physical, more visual. And the one piece that I brought today to manifest that concept is a piece that I created in the early 80s when I was an artist in residence at MIT, had access to a lot of nice, sophisticated technology. I was trained as a drummer, so I thought, like, well, wouldn't it be interesting if we could take the human heartbeat, and that could be the drum, and somehow we could amplify that, and with a dancer, and have some singers over top of that, and you know, it was a wonderful time for me at MIT where I could just dream, because I know that they could build anything that I could think up. And it's part of one of the reasons I've stayed in Boston all these years, because I still have access to the resources there, and it's been a great place for me to develop new ideas. So what I'm going to do is show a little clip here with a dancer that some of you may be familiar with.
In New York City this week, Mikhail Baryshnikov unveiled one of the most unusual performances of his career. By mixing audio and medical technology, he creates a dance from the heart. Beth Nissen explains.
Mikhail Baryshnikov, about to dance to an organ accompaniment, the accompaniment of his own heart. The small transmitter he is wearing is the idea of Christopher Janney, who calls himself a sound artist.
Well, this is actually a device that was developed for biomedical purposes for post-operative heart patients to be able to get up out of bed and walk down the hall or do various kinds of exercises and not be connected via wires to a normal EKG machine.
Janney first put the transmitter on dancer and choreographer Sarah Rudner. She improvised movements to the audible beat created by her heart, transmitted to antennas, and amplified through speakers. Their dance invention is now being performed as a solo work by Baryshnikov. You've always danced with your heart. Have you ever danced this literally?
Not quite like that. Not quite like that. You have to actually use your heartbeat as an instrument, your body as an instrument.
The instrument that is his heart plays more quickly as he moves, raising his heart rate, which sets an even faster pace for his dancing, which raises his heart rate even more.
Well, it goes up to probably 160, 180. Every day your heartbeat's slightly different. It's a lot of surprises. How much it changes your heartbeat according to your moods. It's very much interconnected to your brain.
Baryshnikov will turn 50 next week. He is still superbly conditioned. Yet while he never seems to miss a step, his heart will miss a beat. Much of what inventor Chris Janney calls our inner noise is irregular, arrhythmic, and there is a lot of inner noise.
You also hear some of the muscles firing, which sounds like distant thunder rumbling. There's the sound of the blood rushing through the veins. There's the sound of the joints moving. I mean, there's all kinds of things going on.
But we rarely hear these sounds, or at least rarely listen to them consciously. Halfway through the dance piece, music begins, muting the drum of the heart. Still, it beats on, unnoticed but vital.
This sound is quite possibly the first sound we ever heard. It's what we heard in the womb.
And what sounds all through a life, keeping time. Beth Nissen, ABC News, New York.
Yes. Okay. So, you know, I created that piece. Oh, thank you. And thank Mikhail Baryshnikov. I created that piece, started that work in 1981. I did it first with Sarah till about 1983, and then Misha asked us to set it on him in the late 90s. I then did a version of it about 3-4 years ago. I was asked by the American Heart Association to create a new work, and I didn't bring any footage of it today, but suffice it to say that I used Emily Coates from New York City Ballet as the dancer, but I then developed more of the music. And I thought, well, what would be the right kind of music over a heartbeat with the dancer? And I said, I'm going to get the Persuasions. I'm going to get the 5 African-American kings of a cappella, who I saw when I was 14, so imagine how old they are, and have them, I'll write some music for them to sing over top her heartbeat. And that's what we did. We made a film. It's called What is a Heart? It'll be out next year about the creation of the work and also the performance. And then the American Heart Association has now asked me to perform the piece again live in Washington, D.C. in February for the American Heart Ball. But being a jazz musician, I never do it the same way twice. And it's in this beautiful, if you've ever been in the National Building Museum in Washington, D.C., it's a beautiful atrium, big architectural, cavernous space. I said, well, as good as the Persuasions are, they're not going to fill the hall enough. So now I'm going to get a 12-person choir that's going to sing together with the Persuasions and Emily Coates. And then, of course, Sarah Rudner, the choreographer and dancer, who's one of my best and oldest friends and really helped me develop this piece. I said, Sarah, it's now time for you to add some dancers as if they were a dream passing through this piece. So I look forward to February 2013. I really don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to stick around and find out. Thanks very much.